Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Let's go. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited. I hope you're excited too. Not every day we have a two-time guest on the podcast, but we do have a two-time podcast guest, and that's Dr. Moiya McTier, who is now a doctor, a real honest-to-goodness doctor, something that you might not have guessed as you were growing up with your story that we talked about in the first time you were on the podcast, and that episode is called Folklorist to the Stars. And we'll talk briefly about that. But I want to introduce you to those of you who may not be familiar. Our audience is expanded like the galaxy. No, the galaxy's not expanding. But like the universe.
Like the universe.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the 2 years exactly since Moiya was on, she was a humble grad student, and now she's a renowned scientist, PhD, graduate of the Columbia University in the city of New York City, I think is the full name of it.
Right. You have to read the full thing legally.
I went to Brown University, and Brown University is in Rhode Island, but that's not the name of the state. The name of the state is Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. So that
I didn't know
it's got
that.
the longest name of any state. They'll probably get rid of plantations. That's not effective anymore. But you're on today because of this wonderful book, The Milky Way, an autobiography of our galaxy. This book is so great that the most famous, the best cosmologist in the world gave an encomium on the back. And
Yes.
of course, I'm thinking about
yes.
Sean Carroll and Stefan Alexander and Chanda Prescott-Weinstein, all friends of the show in one way or another. Paul Sutter, rhymes with butter. I'll never make that mistake again. So Sean called it an entertaining introduction to some of the most profound features of our astrophysical neighborhood. Chanda called it an exciting romp through the universe. Stefan Alexander said an out-of-this-world work of genius. Wow, it's better than he said on my two books.
I know. I was impressed when I saw that.
And lastly, your humble host, Brian Keating, said a deliciously hilarious and irresistible romp shimmering with astrophysical facts. Cutting-edge observation, McTier pens the autobiography that our galaxy deserves. And Moiya, this is a phenomenal accomplishment. First of all, I hate it when you have a comedian go on Stephen Colbert, and then Colbert says, "Why are you so funny? What makes you so funny?" Because guaranteed, the next thing they're going to say is hilariously unfunny. But you have this incredible wit, and the galaxy has such a sharp tongue. Where did this come from? Where did this idea, first of all, come from? And I'll actually start with what you're never supposed to do, what we couldn't do last time because you didn't have a book of this caliber. You had books of high caliber, and works of high caliber. But this is published by Hachette Group and Grand Central Publishing. But what I like to do is judge books by their covers, because what else are you going to do? Right? So what's the?
That's the information you have first.
Exactly. Right. It's the first prior information. So, Moiya, please tell us, what is the meaning of the cover design and the subtitle of this wonderful new book?
Yes. So this cover, I didn't design it. They had someone at the publisher do it, and they sent me two options originally. And when I saw this cover, which is like a pink nebula behind the words the Milky Way, I was just in love, and I was like, that one, it has to be that one. It originally did not have the Andromeda constellation on it, and I asked them to add it in because the book
you're attached to it, aren't you? Aren't you a little bit attached to it?
Well, the Milky Way is certainly attached to the Andromeda galaxy, and I just wanted to bring in that piece of romance to the book. But it's called an autobiography of our galaxy because it is written from the perspective of the Milky Way galaxy, telling its own story from its birth, that's in air quotes, all the way to its eventual demise, which would be the end of the universe.
Right. And but as an autobiography, what gave you that idea? Because that is such a unique. I've never read. I mean, there's books of folklore and kind of descriptions as you go through, and we'll talk about in this conversation. But the idea for an autobiography of what we thought of until now as an inanimate object, how did that inspiration strike you?
Really, I think it came from a place of insecurity. I think that it came from this place where I was very excited to get a deal to write a book, but I didn't want to just put something out there that other people had done. And I was looking at books by people like you, by people like Stefan Alexander. And I was like, who am I to add my voice? Like, what can I really add that is new? Not much, but the Milky Way can add a lot. And I thought that it would just be a fun way to learn about this, and maybe a less intimidating narrator than a person like you or Dr. Alexander.
Yeah. Well, it's phenomenally successful, and it's one of those books that, you know, I think the real encomium I want to give is it's the book I wish I could have written, because actually there are similarities in our books in that dust and gas play a huge role in the Milky Way and also in your book. And of course, the dust and gas are the villains of my first book, Losing the Nobel Prize, which is all about how dust obscured our glimpse of the birth of the universe. But what's so fascinating about this book is that you really give an astrophysicist, I don't want to say but the insight of a professional, but you do it in such a way as to be accessible without, I hate these two words, dumbed down. How do you react when someone says, Moiya, can you dumb it down? You're such a super uber genius. Can you dumb it down for me? How do you react to that? You may not feel the same way as me.
No, I think I do. I really hate it because someone doesn't know about the expansion of the universe, or they don't know these cosmological facts, that doesn't mean they're dumb. That just means they haven't heard them before. They haven't learned it. Everyone has to learn something for the first time at some point, right? So we don't have to dumb it down. We just have to translate it to what they already know.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And you do it in such an inviting, accessible way that I think it will appeal. You know, usually the worst advice you can give to an author is, you know, they ask, well, who is it for? And you say, oh, make it for everybody. No, that'll be nobody except for your immediate family. But this really is accessible. And the way that you do and kind of like start off, or the pitch for the book is, you know, it all began 13 billion years ago in clouds of gas scattered throughout the universe's primordial plasma, just could not keep their metaphorical hands off of each other. They succumbed to the gravitational attraction in the galaxy we knew it was born. Since then, so this is kind of steamy. We're keeping PG-13. You know, my audience is young. And they name and the purpose. Galactic archaeologists have worked to determine its true age, which is rude, according to Miss. How do you think of the Milky Way? Do you think of it as a gender or no? Is it a woman?
And it says several times, I'm using the pronoun it, because it says several times that galaxies don't care about gender. They don't have any of our fleshy bits. They don't have any of our hormones. Like they don't give a crap. So it is genderless. And
I always like to ask, you know, from your perspective, after you having, you know, written this book and many works of folklore, do you learn something when you're doing it? Or is it something that, you know, you had so much knowledge being a PhD at one of the top universities in the galaxy, you know, that you had this insight for. And so you didn't really learn anything, but you learned, you know, you packaged it or whatever. Or did you learn something? Were there new facts about the galaxy, astrophysics, cosmology, black holes? What did you learn, if anything?
Yeah, I learned a lot for this book. The outline was stuff that I already knew. I've taken cosmology classes. I've taken galactic evolution classes. So I knew most of it, but some of the details in both the science and the folklore were new to me. The chapter near the end where I start talking about quantum field theory and how, because I had to explain quantum field theory and what the Higgs boson is to explain that potential ultimate fate of the universe. So I had to learn that. I have never taken a quantum class, and that was really fun, actually. And then some of the folklore, I am not very strong on my East Asian folklore, and most of the Scandinavian, like Northern European folklore that I know is Norse and Germanic. So I got to read up on some Finnish myths, and some like Eastern European, like Serbian myths, which was really fun.
I love the illustrations. And there's so many, they're so whimsical in many ways, but they're also technical, and they have a lot of, I always say red meat, but there's a lot of vegans that listen. So I'm going to say some white tofu. Is that okay?
Yes, some jackfruit.
Some jackfruit, some tabbouleh, whatever you need. But then you get, I'm gluten-free. I don't want to deal with it. But some of the things in there were really evocative and actually took me back to my last voyage down to Chile. South Pole, there's not so many indigenous people that live there. There's some indigenous penguins that live on the continent, but besides that, so you'll get an exposure, literally, figuratively, to incredible astronomical information, but condensed in a way that anybody can understand it. And again, it's a book I wish not only that I could have written, but that I could have read as a teenager when I was just getting my first little telescope, not far from New York City, and looking up and really just like looking at it. It's so overwhelming. And what I like about this book is that it uses this metaphorical vehicle of the galaxy as the protagonist in this hero's journey, or heroine's journey, or androgynous journey throughout the universe. And what's so fun about it is that you take on the whole universe, but it's subtle. It sneaks up on you. Was that by design? In other words, you're discretizing the universe into a galaxy as the fundamental unit, our home galaxy as a particular example. But you're teaching about everything from quantum fields to black holes to exoplanets to dust. Was that intentional, or did that emerge during the course of the writing of the book?
Absolutely intentional. One of the reasons I chose to write it from this perspective was because when I think about the universe, I picture it as a collection of galaxies. And I also know that galaxies are collections of stars, which are collections of atoms. But I like what you said, that galaxies are kind of like the base unit. And as a galaxy, it's the midpoint. It can see these small human scales. It can watch us, and it can kind of understand what we're like, but it also understands the universal scales. And I thought that the Milky Way would be a nice translator for us to get to thinking on those larger than us scales that we need to think from. We need to think from that perspective if we're ever going to overcome all of our human squabbles that we have.
That's right. And you take the grand picture. I found it very stoic. I had on Ryan Holiday last year, who's a famous Stoic author, wrote, The Obstacle is the Way, and many other books on Stoicism. And, it's kind of, it kind of has these features of Stoicism. There's this concept of memento mori, know that you're going to die, contemplate on that, and know that you're going to live. I always add on to it. And I wanted to ask you if that narrative conceit, in a good way, is born of your biography. So I do want to read your biography, and in particular, the first sentence of your biography, which your publisher kindly sent me. Dr. Moiya McTier is an astrophysicist, folklorist, and science communicator based in New York City. After graduating from Harvard, that's in Massachusetts, I think.
Yeah, maybe you've heard of it.
I only know of Brown, and now I know of Columbia in the Ivy League, as the first person in the school's history to study both astronomy and mythology. Moiya earned her PhD in astrophysics at Columbia University. She was selected as an NSF Foundation Research Fellow. She has consulted with companies like Disney and PBS on their fictional worlds, helped design exhibits in the New York Hall of Science, and given hundreds of talks about science around the globe, including features on MSNBC, NPR, and Now This News. What I wanted to drill down on is, to alleviate my Jewish neuroses, that I couldn't have written this book because I know nothing about folklore other than what you taught me 2 years ago. So in other words, did your training in folklore, which is so unique, did that, is that imbued throughout this book? In other words, could no one besides you have written this book, essentially? What vehicles, if any, come from folklore training?
I think someone like Jarita Holbrook could have written this book. Maybe someone in the past like Owen Gingrich could have written this book. There are archaeoastronomers around, so I don't think I have a 100% unique perspective, but yeah, there aren't many people who could have written this because I really did want the folklore to be a through line. I see folklore as and maybe I've said this in our last interview, I see it as an early attempt at science. It was humankind's way of explaining the natural world around them. And they did it with like gods and magical creatures, but at its root, these mythologies that people came up with were based on their observations of the world, just like science is today. So I wanted people to learn from this book that it's like a spectrum, it started off as mythology, and then there was philosophy, and you had people in the 1600s talking about the ether of the universe, and now we can talk about dust and dark energy and dark matter in more scientific terms. But I wanted people to make that connection.
Right. Yeah. And what fascinates me is that you do go on from the biggest scales to the smallest scales, or the opposite, maybe in some sense. When I encountered, I haven't had as much, any training of it, as I said, but in the Chilean Atacama Desert, we do encounter at our observatory site what are called Atacaminos. These are natives of the Atacama Desert, distant relatives perhaps of the Inca civilization. And the Atacama Desert is huge. It's 1,000 miles north to south, and it's literally the driest place on Earth half the time. But what was so fascinating to me, and maybe I'll fold in, I was there in 2019 when there was a total eclipse of the sun visible from Chile, not from the Atacama Desert's northern part where the Simons Observatory is. Nevertheless, we had locals there that were kind of talking about their folklore. And what was so fascinating to me is the role, not that the Milky Way's luminous bits play in their mythology, but the dust, the dark, dust clouds that kind of pervade the night sky. And in fact, they have constellations that are dark, as I learned, actually writing in my first book and then meeting some of them throughout the last 10 years or so, in that they have things that they believe the stars are dead and effectively or inanimate, like a river. The Milky Way is like depicted as a river. No offense to the protagonist of your book.
No, that's okay. The Milky Way is all right with that. Because the river is what gives us life, right? So the Milky Way loves that in this mythology, and it's mentioned in the book, that the dark constellations are living animals that feed or drink from the water of the Milky Way.
I just love it because there's one dust constellation, dark cloud constellation, called the Llama, I think it is, and then there's a sub constellation called the umbilicus of the Llama. So imagine you go up to a bar in 1300 AD, and you're talking to some hot member of your preferred target audience, and you say, "What's your sign?"
Ooh.
And they say, I'm an umbilicus. Oh, wow. That's wonderful.
I love that. If there's an old Chilean astrology, the way we have astrology and horoscopes these days, it'd be oh, the umbilicus, you're really good at making connections and nurturing people.
Have you ever been asked these questions, Moiya? Oh, you're an astronomer. You're so smart. I'm a Pisces. Can you?
All the
how
time.
Do you react when I get that all the time. So how do you react to it?
I react by telling them, astrophysically speaking, there is no reason for that to be a thing. Historically, astrology was much more practical. It was about when will you plant your crops and when will you know that the nutrition you rely on every year is coming back. I mean, in Australia, the Aboriginal Australians used to look for a constellation that they said looked like an emu to kind of coincide with when the Earth emus were laying their eggs, and they would eat those eggs. So astrology used to be very practical. So I usually say, I don't know anything about astrology. Astronomy and astrology are different things these days, so I am not the expert you're looking for.
I used to say that too, but it never dissuades people. So now I decide to have some fun with it. Oh, you're a Pisces. That lump on your backside, that's skin. I don't want to say, but have a check.
Do you know your sign? Do you get into conversations with them about that?
I do. But I once had some fun with it. So I'm a Virgo, but I went out with my my soon-to-be wife on a date many years ago, and we encountered someone on the street, and they were like, "Oh, I'll tell your horoscope or whatever," and I said, "Okay, yeah, I'm a Pisces, blah blah blah. I'm gonna do this," and they said, "Oh, well, that's great, and here's what's gonna happen to you, and the IRS is gonna be whatever they said." And then I said, "Oh, I just want to double check. Pisces are the ones that are born in September, right?" I said, "No, that's Virgo." Oh, Virgo. Oh. The same things are going to happen to you. It didn't matter. It didn't make any difference. And so anyway, so now I decide to do that. So there's so many things we can talk about. I mean, one thing that I get now is that I get introduced, I'm a cosmologist. And then I have to say, despite the appearance, I don't do hair and nails. But in the case of cosmology, it comes from cosmos, which is another Greek word, which means beauty or face. And one of the beautiful things of this book is that you're portraying the visceral sensations of how people reacted, to not just the original kind of, indigenous cultures or whatever, but how people are reacting to modern scientific facts. So what did you, what's the most fascinating? I mean, if you have to pick, I mean, it's like picking your favorite kid if you have multiple kids.
Right.
Although I would say to my mom, who's your favorite? There's four of us brothers. And she'd say, that's like asking me to choose my left hand or my right hand. I say, Mom, you are left-handed.
Yeah, like you have a favorite hand.
Let's be real. It's me.
You're
is
the
there
left
a favorite aspect? Is there a favorite aspect of your favorite galaxy, or are all nooks and crannies equally delightful?
Like favorite physical part of a galaxy?
Yeah.
I mean, I gotta say the bulge. For a Milky Way type galaxy, a barred spiral galaxy that has a central bulge in the middle, I think that the bulge is where the most exciting stuff happens. And I am totally biased because that's where I did most of my PhD research. But that's where you get a dense enough collection of stars that stars can interact gravitationally fairly often. That's where, if you're imagining a sci-fi universe where there's this federation of connected star systems, the bulge is where that would do really well because it's so easy to slingshot yourself from one system to another. Like I would love to think that in the bulge of some galaxy somewhere there's like an alien subway system of just getting slingshotted from one system to another. But the spiral arms are very pretty. I'll say that. But for me, it's the bulge. What about you?
Well, I think what so fascinates me is are the kind of the dusty bits, the parts that are both not only critical to the formation of the planets and eventually trickling down into the material that our parents and mother ate to nourish us while we were being gestated inside of her, not for billions of years, but and we actually have the same material. The iron that flows through our blood, is very similar to the iron that is in this meteorite that I keep on my desk over here to remind me that we are come from dust, and to dust we shall return. So I would say, yeah, dust is, and it also provides a cautionary tale that we kind of overlook the dark parts of both ourselves, of society, perhaps, but also we want to not be obscured by things that are trying to keep us down.
Yeah.
Peering through that will sometimes give us the truest glimpse of truth, as they say. So,
I love that.
I'm with Gandhi. Gandhi said that a person, we go through life trampling dust under our feet, but you should really be so humble to think that a little piece of dust could crush you. And of course, that did happen to at least one cosmic experiment not too long ago. So, last time we talked a little bit about your research. I do want to go into a little bit more detail on that. You mentioned a little bit about the bulge, but specifically inside the bulge, we talked a little bit last time about exoplanets, and they've been in the news a lot for obvious reasons. People suspect that there is life outside our home planet. I want to ask you, do you think, I mean, we don't have evidence, but do you think that there is, that we're alone? I mean, is this great big empty galaxy made for us in a sense, or is it just teeming with life that we have yet to observe or encounter?
If I'm being responsible, I have to say, well, the evidence does not support it yet. But if I'm just being me, yes, it would be such a waste of space. I know I'm not the first person to say that, but it would be such a waste of space if we were the only ones here. And because I've studied exoplanets and the habitability of those planets, and because as a folklorist, my specialty is fictional world building, I can't help but think about the amazingly diverse types of life that would form on the equally diverse types of planets that we have in the universe. The planets range in size and the types of stars that they orbit and the materials that they're made of and the atmospheres they have. It's just, there's so many options. So I think yes, probably.
And besides the Andromeda Galaxy, which kind of dominates, what do you make of these galaxies that are kind of rogue, that don't really quite fit into the mold of a typical galaxy? I'm thinking of these galaxies that recently may have been discovered that have no dark matter. In other words, all their gravitational force can be accounted by the luminous matter. What do you make of these? Or our satellite galaxies? What do you make of these little, are they just hangers-on, in the retinue of cosmic paparazzi? What do you make of these satellite dwarf galaxies that don't get much attention?
Yeah, the Milky Way certainly has strong feelings about these dwarf galaxies. In the book, the Milky Way, we talk mostly about Andromeda and the large and small Magellanic Clouds, who are Larry and Sammy, respectively. And we also talk a lot about the Triangulum galaxy, which is a satellite around Andromeda. And yeah, the Milky Way does kind of see these dwarf satellites as hangers-on. It complains that Larry, the large Magellanic Cloud, is lazy and really bad at making decisions, and it doesn't make as many stars as it should. But they also have these gravitational interactions, and you hinted at it earlier when you were reading the synopsis that gravity and gravitational attraction I took kind of literally in this book, so that if you have a very strong gravitational attraction, it's almost like a marriage or like a hookup or a fling. But even if it doesn't get to that level, these galaxies are exchanging material, and that makes them close to each other. But these dark matterless galaxies, I think they're really interesting because we think that dark matter was really pivotal in creating our galaxy, that the mass of dark matter, which was massive so it could gravitationally attract things, but was cooler than the other matter around it, helped the material early on in the universe clump to form these mass pockets that eventually turned into galaxies. So I think it's just so interesting that there are some that don't have much dark matter that we can see.
All right. What's the biggest misconception about our galaxy or other galaxies that you've encountered in your career? That
everything is still. I have been shocked lately by how many people think that things in space are still. And I think that it comes from, we talk about zero gravity existing in space. I think that that's a mistake that we've made, because there's gravity everywhere in space, and that gravity makes everything move. So I love telling people about how the sun moves around the galaxy at something like 500,000 miles an hour. I love talking about how the Milky Way and Andromeda are moving towards each other at something like 100 kilometers per second. It's really fast. We are moving all the time. That's a big misconception.
Yeah. I often get this question that presupposes knowledge about the galaxy that's wrong. So people say, because all the matter in the Milky Way is rotating around the black hole at the center, it's kind of keeping us all together. Let's talk about black holes. They feature prominently.
Oh, yes, they do.
What is the Milky Way's relationship with the black hole Sag A star? We've had on Shep Dolman recently, and the most recent announcement of the imaging of our own galaxy's event horizon. Talk about the black hole. What does the black hole mean to the Milky Way? How does it react to so much attention going to it, et cetera?
Okay, first of all, I was so upset about the timing of that Event Horizon Telescope image. Like, you couldn't have put this out like 6 months earlier. Because it felt like that image came out just a few weeks after I submitted the final copy of the book, and I was like, oh, too bad. But in this book, the Milky Way has a very strong relationship with its supermassive black hole, Sag A star, which the Milky Way calls Sarge. And there's a joke in the book about how the name Sarge is not derived from Sagittarius A star. It's actually a much older name derived from an old galactic language that means something like duty head. So it's just like a very childish insult that the Milky Way is giving its black hole. Because in this book, black holes are the physical manifestation of a galaxy's essentially mental health struggles. And that's because I was writing this book throughout a pandemic where I was personally dealing with some of the worst mental health issues that I've ever had. And I know that a lot of other people were dealing with the same. So that's what the black hole represents. And throughout the book, the Milky Way has to reckon with its mental health struggles and figure out how to not let Sarge consume the Milky Way, because we see examples out in space of black holes that get so massive, they get so hot, they have such strong feedback winds that they actually quench the star formation in their home galaxies, essentially killing their galaxies. So there was this tension in the book where Sarge could kill the Milky Way, but the Milky Way had to figure out how to not let that happen.
I wonder if we could pivot to something you said about the mental health issues. I know that you know, in our first conversation, we talked a little bit about that. We talked about, you know, what it's like to be a graduate student, how challenging that was, and how at that time, even you weren't planning to necessarily remain in the field of, you know, astronomical, you know, kind of pecking order that I call the academic Hunger Games, you know, postdoc, junior faculty, multiple postdocs, multiple faculty, tenure track, you know, et cetera. Did anything of that play a role? Because I know, like, when did you defend? You defended in 2021?
Yeah, April 2021.
Okay, so it was in the middle of the pandemic. But even before that, you had talked candidly about some of the struggles that you just referred to. I wonder, for those that haven't watched the first episode, but will consume that right after this episode, can you recapitulate a little bit about that? What is it like being a student? I've had on 5 or so students. Actually, I've had on, you know, 4 or 5 students of color that are graduate students, and, you know, some that are obviously, you know, advanced faculty, you know, distinguished professors. But I want to ask, you know, what were those struggles, and what advice would you give to somebody, you know, who just doesn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, whether that could be a pandemic or grad school's taken 6.5, 7 years or whatever. My students at 9 years. No, I'm just kidding, my students. You'll be out in 8, guys, girls, don't worry. No, but talk seriously. What were the struggles, and what advice do you have for people going through them?
Yeah, so grad school was very tough for me. It was not the only thing that contributed to my mental health state, but it was a big factor, especially during the pandemic. I would say that when you're a grad student, you spend part of your time doing research. Early on in grad school, you spend a lot of time taking classes, and your status in graduate school is kind of dependent on your advisor and the chair and the people who make decisions in your department. And that in itself is really difficult. So grad students don't get paid well. Most grad students don't make a wage that allows them to live in the area where they need to get to the grad school. Grad school and academia in general, it has this opaque hierarchical structure. There's you know, like undergrad students, and then grad students and postdocs and multiple levels of professors that you just mentioned. And there is that hierarchical structure, but it's not always clear how that structure is arranged and who has what privileges in their positions. So as a grad student, you kind of are at the mercy of anyone else who is higher than you on that ladder. And there's also the added difficulty of academia being a difficult place to get jobs right now. There's no retirement age in academia. So we are graduating more people with PhDs, but there aren't enough slots for them to work in. There aren't enough careers for them to have if they want to stick within academia. So that was really hard for me. I would say, for advice to anyone who is going through that, one, I know it's difficult, but try not to compare yourself to other people. Who cares if it's taking you 6 or 7 or 8 years? My mom she got pregnant with me and had me when she was in her PhD program. It took her 15 years to finish her PhD. So, like, don't compare yourself to other people, because you don't know what type of journey they're on. You don't know where they started, and you don't know what obstacles are in their way. They don't know what journey you're on. You don't know what journey you're on. You don't know what's coming next. So try not to compare yourself, and try not to think of where you should be, because there is no place where you should be right now, except for where you are.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I always, you know, I'm reluctant to give advice, but, you know, because everyone has to go through journeys together, and we'll, in a few minutes, go through, you know, advice to your former self, not necessarily as a grad student, could be as a young person. If I remember correctly, your mother also wanted to burden you with one of the most challenging names there could possibly be, right? But it wasn't spelled the same way as my name, as Brian with a Y, I think. So You avoided that fate, but homonymically
we could have
been related. But yeah, I mean, I hate it when people give ideas, like, oh, what should you do? I don't know what's worse when someone says, gives you advice from this, like I know everything, or when they say, my best advice is just keep doing what you're doing.
It's not advice. It's not satisfying at all. I think in some ways I'd rather you just say nothing, because both of those pieces of advice kind of suck.
Yeah, exactly. Right. When you have a question, what to say nothing. So I want to talk about like a research, because now you are, I see you on TV. I see you on TikTok now. You're trying to like get me into TikTok. I don't even know what doming is. I don't know where you get this stuff.
That review of the book was.
I do follow you.
I have not stopped thinking about that review since I read it.
So we'll put a link to all of your social stuff so people can know what we're talking about. But that was great. It inspired me to like start a TikTok account. So when you're assessing where your career is now, are you feeling like you want to get back to the folklore side? Do you want to go more into the outreach? Do you want to become a pundit, a science communicator? What aspects of research? Because I know you're so curious, you're so passionate. You'll always be a researcher and a scholar. But so where is next for you specifically after the smash of this book? It's kind of after it passes by in a couple of years.
Yeah, great question. I love doing science communication across media platforms. It's really hard for me to describe my job when I meet new people. I'm like, oh, I'm a science communicator. And they say, oh, okay, what's that? And then I have to rattle off this list of like a podcast, a book, a YouTube show, blah, blah, blah. So I think I want to continue with that. I love being able to work on different projects that I can switch between when I get bored with one of them. Over the pandemic, I have been playing around with a self-diagnosis of ADHD, and being able to jump from one thing to another is really helpful for my brain. But my ultimate goal is my next big goal, hopefully the book will help with this, is to host my own TV show. I'm developing one now, have been for a couple of years, because the TV industry is really slow, even slower than publishing. Yes. But I would love to host a science comedy TV show. I basically just want to spend the rest of my life helping people understand the world around them better through science, while also doing my fictional world building thing, because that is just something that I really enjoy doing. I combine my astronomy and my folklore expertise by building new fictional worlds based on science, and that's just fun. So I want to keep doing that.
Yeah, and it's they always say, competition's for losers. You should do something that you have this unique advantage to do. We already talked about the book and this perspective that you alone can bring. Maybe these other folks that you mentioned. I don't know if Owen could pen such a delightful romp. You might know the folklore,
right.
Okay, all right. But the rest of it, I don't know if he has the richness of tone. But you're doing something that you do have this unique set of skills that, like Liam Neeson. And,
I have a very specific set of skills.
You have a very... That's right. Do not mess with Dr. McTier. So you should do what fulfills. You do a podcast. You do, and we'll have links to all those, the YouTube. And the TV is great. Yeah, I guess the last question, kind of in the career aspect before we turn, because I know you've got a hard break coming up, and I want to get to my Fantastic Four, formerly the Thrilling Three, but now the Fantastic Four. I want to ask you, when you think about this, delayed gratification in writing this book. I mean, you had just started thinking about it back in 2020 when we did our first interview. You were still a student. You were thinking about defending your thesis. You were still writing. Now that that's behind you, now you're talking about TV, and those are all so well suited. How do you handle the delay of gratification? I think that was one of my challenges as a student, at least. Writing books, whatever, it takes as long as it takes. It's kind of hard to rush it, although the publishing industry, there's still, I don't know about you, but I was swapping Word files back. And I mean, who does that?
My editor refused to use Google Docs, so she was like, we are using Word. And I was like, well, okay. The options were Word or Overleaf. So we just exchanged Word documents. Because I don't think she would have known how to use it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, if she could pick up late, I would like to know her. But having gone through this and now talking about TV, yeah, that's even more, and then it's so fickle and it's so hard. I remember writing my first book, again, talking with Ryan Holiday. I said, he asked me, well, what's your book competing against? And I said, well, these great books by Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Greene and Lisa Randall. And he said, no, you idiot. It's competing against every squirrel video there is on YouTube. And that was before TikTok. I mean, that was before Tinder and all the other things that I'm into now. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not on Tinder. My wife is going to say
that's also not the best
But
dating
anyway,
app.
I want to ask you, I know. I heard all these different, Instagram is better for, I'm so thankful that I'm not dating. You have no idea. Marriage can cause a lot of problems for some people, not for me, thankfully, but it cures the need to go on. I feel great sympathy for people that are searching for their shirt, their intended one, as we say. But anyway, how do you handle delayed gratification with things like TV? It seems excruciating. I did an episode of Unexplained with William Shatner, and he didn't even show up, but I just recorded it as if he's there. How do you handle that? And it took a year to come out.
I
and they don't
know.
even tell you when it's out. It's just you have an IMDb page. How do you handle the delayed gratification?
Yeah, I don't handle it well. I'm a very impatient person. You can see it. It's coming out. I have been so ready for the world to read this book for months. I tried to ease some of that pressure, release a little bit of the steam by going on Twitter and saying hey, give me a random page number and I'll show you a line from this book. I just wanted to get it out there. So I think using social media to give tidbits has helped a lot, but mostly it's me. I have jaw problems now because I'm clenching my teeth so much because I'm too impatient.
Yeah, the pub day is going to be huge. We're
Thank you.
going to release this on pub day, hopefully, and just give it the attention that it so richly deserves. It's such a great book. We're talking Dr. Moiya McTier, The Milky Way, the autobiography that our galaxy deserves. We have just wonderful encomium. Ryan North calls it a direct, fun, charming mix of the science, the folklore, and the history of our Milky Way galaxy. Kelly Wiener
In that full review, he then goes on to say, and because I am part of the galaxy, I deserve part of the credit, which I love.
I know. Yeah, they always do limit the list of it, how much we can actually include. But yeah, Paul Sutter says McTier's sharp wit and sharper intellect strike the perfect tone for this breezy tale on the history of our galaxy. Truly the biggest tell-all story in the universe. And I'm so glad it comes out in August because it is a beach read. As I said, it's lovingly illustrated, so richly full of scientific content. It's a stealth vector to learn about the richest topics in science, not just in, some narrow niche of astronomy. So now, Dr. McTier, if you would indulge me in the remaining few minutes, I would like to play a game now called The Fantastic.
I am ready to get fantastic.
Okay, and to do this, I'm even going to do something I haven't done yet. Let's see if this works. Computer, turn on the plug.
Ooh.
Let's see if that works. Boom.
That's fancy.
And I can even do this. You know that this podcast is into the impossible, and it's one of Arthur C. Clarke's laws. We're going to get to that in just a second. But the word podcast, that you have the podcast,
Exolore.
I'm blank. Is it called the Everything? Exolore, yeah. So we'll have a link to that. So the word podcast comes from Sir Arthur C. Clarke in terms of the 2001 The Space Odyssey, when Dave says to Hal, open the pod bay doors. So now I'm going to do that. Computer, open the pod bay doors.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that. Also, we're not in space.
All
I
right,
love that. Good job.
My computer's feeling a little bit... I'm going to plug in my computer synthesized voice into a plug that I'm going to tell it to turn off, and I'm going to see if it will kill itself. Okay, anyway, Moiya, we have some questions here. And the first one involves you talk about the galaxy's demise. We'll get to that in just a bit. But I want to ask you, from the perspective of the Milky Way,
to
answer these questions. So the first thing involves what's called in Hebrew an ethical will, or a zava'ah. It's not material, giving something to people in terms of money. I'm sure Harvard and Columbia will take all of the Milky Way's munificence. But I want to ask you, what wisdom would the Milky Way want to give to future galaxies, generations down the line, after its untimely demise in a few billion years?
Bother getting upset about an outcome. Don't bother getting upset about an inevitable outcome. A lot of the Milky Way's mental health struggles come from the fact that it is creating these stars, it falls in love with them, and then they eventually die. And it feels really bad that to continue living, it has to keep making these stars. So if there is something that you can't change, that will always be this way, or like the outcome is inevitable, don't get stressed about it.
Great. Okay, the next one, I want you to now look into your crystal ball, billions of years more into the future, but really in harmony with Sir Arthur Clarke's famous aphorism that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. What is the Milky Way most proud of that human beings have been able to discover about it, about the universe? Anything about astrology? What would the universe put on its monolith, so to speak, in terms of a way to have a little bit of swagger, which I know the Milky Way has? What is the most impressive accomplishment for you?
For the Milky Way to do, or that it thinks humans will do?
Yeah. That humans have done to make the Milky Way proud of
the
itself.
The Milky Way will be proud when humans find out how to do faster than light travel. That's what it's waiting for. It wants to see us interact with the rest of it and like really get to learn what it's all about. And like if there are aliens out there, which the Milky Way can neither confirm nor deny, it wants to see humans interact with them.
Okay. So next question is going to go backwards in time, and it harkens to Sir Arthur's third law, which states the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. And that's the origin of the name of this podcast. I'm the Associate Director of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination at UC San Diego. So I want to ask you, as a young galaxy, what was mysterious about, 'cause there's no handbook for galaxies, right? How did the Milky Way know what to do? So what perplexed you in your early first billion years or so that now makes sense that you would give sort of as advice to your former self or other galaxies that are up and coming to try to adjust to the life in the universe that you've enjoyed?
I love that.
So advice
I think
to your
early
former
on
self.
the Milky Way would have been a little confused that everyone was going away. Like with the expansion of the universe, it would have been like, why are all my friends leaving? Do they not like me? And so I think the Milky Way would say to its younger self, like, no, it's not that they don't like you. There's just this force that's making them move away from you. You're fine. You're great.
Except for that lazy Lenny and Sammy, right? They've always been by your side, right?
We'll probably have to eat them one day.
Okay, now I want to ask.
Right?
Oh man, that'll teach him to be lazy. I want to ask you, Moiya, a perspective now. This is one of Arthur's laws as well. And he said the following. He said, when a distinguished but elderly scientist says something is possible, they are almost certainly right. But when they say something is impossible, they are very probably wrong. Now I want to ask you, Moiya, as you're a distinguished scientist that has influenced hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. What have you changed your mind on? What, if anything, have you been wrong about that you've changed your mind on either recently or throughout your career?
This might sound kind of meta, but I feel like I used to believe that I was a fixed state, that I was like, this was my personality, this is who I am, I will not change. And I have learned that I can grow, that I can change, that anyone can learn and grow and change. And that's been really eye-opening. It's helped me a lot with the way that I interact with people and the way that I like judge myself, and it's helped me give myself a lot more grace.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, Dr. Moiya McTier, author of this phenomenal book called The Milky Way, an autobiography of our galaxy. The galaxy is for everybody. I want to thank you so much for spending so much of your time. I wish you all the best and great congratulations on another book. And we look forward to having you back as an ultra-rare third-time guest on the Into the Impossible podcast.
Thank you. I would love to come
like.
back. And thanks so much for the kind words you said about the book. It really warms my heart.
I did love it, and I listened to it, and you all should either get, well, you should get all the copies, digital, Kindle, Audible, and also buy the hardcover, which is richly illustrated. All of them are, and you'll just delight.
Yes, it is.
And
In
the
my
audiobook
own
narrated
voice,
by
I
you, right?
kind of put on an affect, like an upper class, maybe type of royal person. That's how I envisioned that the Milky Way would talk. Just a little bit, yeah.
Just a little bit of snark. Yeah, exactly. Love it. All right, Moiya. Well, we love you on the show, and we wish you a great rest of your summer. Great congratulations. Phenomenal
Thank you
congratulations
again. Take
on
care.
all your success.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.